Okay, I'm very happy to welcome you here in this discussion. So today we'll continue our discussion on the tradition and the individual talent. So in our last lecture, we talked about the importance of tradition and also uh, the different, you can say the significance of it, the traditional elements, how actually Eliot begins the essay by pointing out that the word tradition is generally regarded as a word of censure. So also he explained that how tradition it works and also its importance while actually writing anything, especially poetry. So he also talked about the literary tradition and the way actually in which it can be accurate. So he mentioned that it is not like that very slavishly we have to imitate, but we have to take the tradition. And also he talked about that we need to change, even if it is possible, then we need to alter it a little bit. And also in that process, we should also direct our present according to that change. So there is a combination, or you can say kind of readjustment of tradition, we can see, the tradition and the present. And also he talks about the dynamic conception of tradition and also its value. So you see he emphasized the value of tradition, and in doing so, Eliot points out that no writer has its value and significance in isolation. So to judge the work of a poet or an artist, as he said, that we must compare and contrast his works with the works of poets and artists in the past. And such comparison and contrast is essential for forming an idea of the real world, real worth or value and significance of a writer and his work. So also Eliot's conception of tradition is a dynamic one, as we have seen from our discussion, that according to his view, tradition is not anything fixed, or it is not something which is very static. It is constantly changing, growing and becoming different from what it is. And the writer in the present must seek guidance from the past. He must conform to the literary tradition. But just as the past directs and guides the present, so the present alters and modifies the past. So when a new work of art is created, if it is really new and original, the whole literary tradition is modified, though ever so slightly. That means we can modify a little bit. The relationship between the past and the present is not one-sided, as he mentioned in his essay. It is a reciprocal relationship. The past directs the present and is itself modified and altered by the present. As he said in his text, the existing monuments form an ideal order among themselves, which is modified by the introduction of the new work of art among them. The existing order is complete before the new work arrives. For order to persist after the supervention of novelty, the whole existing order must be, if ever so slightly altered. So you see, we can bring some slight changes if it is needed. And he mentioned a word here, is a supervention. Supervention means, I mean, as a consequence of the past, something happened in the previous, so we can get something in the present. Supervene, the verb is supervene, which means ensue. That means something happens because something happened in the past. So it's a kind of sequel, we can say. So there is the tradition and in the past, and if we really want to create something novel, so we have to depend on the tradition. So that is a supervention of the novelty, that we can say. So he mentioned it in that way. Also, he talked about the function of tradition, how tradition works. So he says, the work of a poet in the present is to be compared and contrasted with the works of the past and judged by the standards of the past. So we have to judge work by taking the past works as the standards, and accordingly we have to consider or compare or find the significance or importance of the present work. And also he gave us the real meaning of the tradition, what does it mean? A sense of tradition also we can find there. Today, actually, we are going to talk about that how actually this work or the and actually he is focusing on the mind of the poet in the next section, that how a poet's mind actually it can work. So now he will try to explain the idea of the impersonality of poetry, or you can say the extinction of personality, which we also call the depersonalization. He mentioned it very clearly, I mean, in his text. If you just take a look at the text where actually I have kept it there on the screen, so you can see, I will be reading to you some of it from here. And here he says, what happens is a continual surrender of himself as he is at the moment to something which is more valuable. The progress of an artist is a continual self-sacrifice, a continual extinction of personality. So you see, the progress of an artist is a continual self-sacrifice. That means you have to sacrifice yourself, a continual extinction of personality. That means your personality cannot be infused into your work. He goes further, he says, there remains to define this process of depersonalization and its relation to the sense of tradition. It is in this depersonalization that art may be said to approach the condition of science. I therefore invite you to consider, as a suggestive analogy, the action which takes place when a bead of finely filiated platinum is introduced into a chamber containing oxygen and sulfurous dioxide. Now, if you're from the science background, so you will be able to understand it easily, but still, it's understandable. It's not that much difficult. I will help you to understand it. He is giving some kind of an example from, I mean, from the chemical reaction. Now you see, here actually he wants to say that the artist must continually surrender himself to something which is more valuable than himself. That means the literary tradition. And he must allow his poetic sensibility to be shaped and modified by the past. He must continue to accurate the sense of tradition throughout his career. In the beginning, his self, his individuality may assert himself, but as his powers mature, there must be greater and greater extension of personality. So a mature writer, he will sacrifice his personality and he will make his writing more impersonal, more objective. So he must acquire a greater and greater objectivity. His emotions and passions must be depersonalized. His emotions and passions must not be there in his writing, in his poetry. He must be as impersonal and as objective as a scientist. So the personality of the artist is not important. So if you want to consider, if you want to evaluate, piece of work, so the personality of the artist is not important. The important thing is his sense of tradition, that whether actually he has a complete sense of his tradition. A good poem is a living whole of all the poetry that has ever been written. So he must forget his personal joys and sorrows, and he absorbed in acquiring a sense of tradition and expressing it in his poetry. So thus the poet's personality is merely a medium, just a medium, having the same significance as a catalytic agent or a receptacle in which chemical reactions take place. That is why Eliot holds that honest criticism and sensitive appreciation is directed not upon the poet, but upon the poetry. So here you see the analogy of the catalyst. Now, if you just take a look at this, that here actually says that honest criticism and sensitive appreciation is directed not upon the poet, but upon the poetry that I've told you. So it is from the text. If we attend to the confused cries of the newspaper critics and the sorcerers of popular reputation that follows, we shall hear the names of poets in great numbers. If we seek not blue book knowledge, but the enjoyment of poetry and ask for a poem, we shall not find it. I have tried to point out the importance of the relation of the poem to the other poems by other authors and suggested the conception of poetry as a living being, as a living whole of all the poetry that has never been written. So he's talking about that how actually a poet actually he should acquire this, or he should have this sense of tradition and how he can compose his writing. And in that process, actually, he must be impersonal. So the other aspect of this impersonal theory of poetry is the relation of the poem to its author. So there is a relation between poem and its author. And he's saying that, and I hinted by an analogy that the mind of a mature poet differs from that of the immature one, not precisely in any valuation or personality, not being necessarily more interesting or having more to say, but rather by being a more finely perfected medium in which spatial or very varied feelings are at liberty to enter into new combinations. So he's saying that the, the mature poet, he will, it's not about the joy, it's not about that you are enjoying the work, it's in not that way actually, you are going to judge the work, but rather we have to say that whether he was objective or not while actually he was expressing his thoughts. Now here he is going on to talk about the catalyst. Now he says that the analogy was that of the catalyst when the two gases previously mentioned are mixed in the presence of a filament platinum. Now he has mentioned two gases. One is let me tell you from the text. Now, when actually he's talking about two gases, for example, uh, just to make it very simple, instead of mentioning all the names of the gases, so it may confuse you if you don't have any exact idea about the chemistry. Now here he says that, for example, there is a gas X and there is gas Y. Now, if you take these two gases, and in some cases, when you take different chemicals together, sometimes you need a kind of catalyst so that the reaction between these two gases will start. That means gas X and between gas Y, there must be a third kind of element. This third kind of element, or this third element, will help, and it's a kind of, you can say, mediator. So what will happen there? This third element, it will help the X and Y to have the reaction. Do you get me what I'm saying?
Yes, sir.
So there will be two kinds of gases. For example, one is X, another one is Y. And the third element will be in between these two gases. And this third element will act as a catalyst that will work as a catalyst to help or to have the reaction between these two gases. Now, what he's saying that a poet's mind is just like that. A poet's mind is just like that, that it will act as a catalyst between just like these two gases. So it is not exactly the combination of two gases. So without the catalyst of the poet's mind, so there cannot be any kind of reaction in the poem, or we cannot get a poem. So now he says that the analogy was that of the catalyst when the two gases previously mentioned are mixed in the presence of a filament of platinum. So platinum is the catalyst here. They form sulfurous acid. So the sulfur and the other gas, he said that when actually you put these two gases, and in between, you put the platinum as a catalyst. So platinum will help to have a reaction between these two gases, and ultimately they will form sulfurous acid. So this combination takes place only if the platinum is present. Nevertheless, the newly formed acid contains no trace of platinum, and the platinum itself is apparently unaffected, has remained inert, neutral, and unchanged. So you see, what is he saying? That this, you have put this platinum in, between these two gases, and that platinum actually helped to have that reaction. But ultimately, the platinum itself, it was unchanged. It wasn't affected by this reaction at all. So though we have got sulfurous acid because of the combination of two different gases, and platinum helped to have that reaction, but platinum itself, it didn't get any kind of effect out of this reaction. So it remained unchanged, it remained neutral. Okay, got it?
Okay, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, so now he's saying that the mind of the poet is the shred of platinum. So that is the thing, that the mind of the poet is just like that catalyst, just like that platinum, that it will help to have the reaction between the poetry and the reader. So reader and the poetry, when a reader will read a poem, he will have the reaction, he will have a kind of combination, because of the combination of these things, we'll have, or you can say the poetic sensibility, the combination of the poet's thought, combination of the poet's feeling, that will be there, but poet's mind, that will remain intact, that will remain neutral. It will not get affected by the combination and unification of this kind of sensibility, or the unification of this thought and poet's emotion. So it will remain unaffected, it will remain unchanged. So it may, now he's saying in the same paragraph, it may partly or exclusively operate upon the experience of the man himself, but the more perfect the artist, the more completely separate in him will be the man who suffers, and the mind which creates, the more perfectly will the mind digest and transmute the passions which are its material. Now he's saying that if a poet, as a man, if he is more mature as an artist, then what will happen, that the more completely separate in him will be the man who suffers and the mind which creates. So as a man or as an artist, he will suffer more, but at the same time, he will remain separated from his creation. That means the material or the poetry that actually he has created, there actually will not find the existence of the poet's mind. Poet's mind will not be there, will not find it there. So there will be no reference of the poet's minds or his thoughts in his work. It will be objective. So the experience, you will notice the elements which enter the presence of the transforming catalyst are of two kinds. I have already mentioned that the transforming catalyst. So what are those things? Those catalysts are two kinds. One is emotions and feelings. That means the poetic sensibility that we say. The effect of a work of art upon the person who enjoys it is an experience different in kind from any experience not of art. So you see, the person who enjoys it, this work, is an experience different in kind from any experience not of art. It may be formed out of non-emotion, or maybe a combination of several. So he's saying that these experience, it can be a formation of one emotion, or maybe combination of several kinds of emotions and various feelings together. Inherent for the writer in particular words or phrases or images may be added to compose the final result. Or great poetry may be made without the direct use of any emotion whatever, composed out of feelings solely. So for him, emotion and feelings are two different things. So he's saying that a poem can be a work of art. It can be made of completely of emotion. There will be no feeling, or maybe it will be completely formed of emotion, but there will be no. It will be formed of feelings, but there will be no emotion in it. So he is saying that emotion and feeling, they can be together in the work, or maybe sometimes only feelings will be there, or sometimes only emotions will be there. So separately, a poet can use them in his work. So now he's also saying, he's also giving some examples from different works, like Inferno, but I don't want to go through all these things. I just want to skip some things from here. And let's see some important items. Here's quoted some lines here. I hope that you can see it on the screen. Can you see that?
Yes, sir. Okay.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right. Now I'll be reading it to you. Now here it says, and now methinks I could even chide myself for doting on her beauty, though her death shall be revenged after no common action. Does the silkworm expend her yearly labors for thee does she undo herself. And lordships sold to maintain ladyships for the poor benefit of a buildering minute. Why does yon fellow falsify highways and put his life between the judge's lips? To refine such a thing keeps horse and man to beat their fellows for her. Now he's saying that in this passage, as is evident, if it is taken in its context, there is a combination of positive and negative emotions. So he's saying that if we take it by the context, that means how actually he's talking about, the ladyships and a lady, and also he's talking about his lips, how lips and how actually man can admire her. So in this way, he's saying that if we take the context, then there is a combination of positive and negative emotions, and intensely strong attraction toward beauty. So we feel that we feel attracted to the beauty, and an equally intense fascination by the ugliness which is contrasts with it and which destroys it. So we can see he is talking about the beauty, and also the poet here actually also uh, he compares our beauty with some kind of ugliness. So he's saying that the ugliness and the beauty both are here. So there is the beauty is the positive emotion, and the ugliness that we have in this stanza, that is the negative emotions. So, but he's saying that uh, this balance of contrasts emotion in the dramatic situation to which the speech is pertinent, but that situation alone is inadequate to it. So he's saying that the balance of contrasted emotion, we can see the balance of the contrasted emotion, the positive emotion and the negative emotion. So in the dramatic situation to which the speech is pertinent, he's saying that it may be pertinent, it is pertinent. Pertinent means it's logical. It is logical, it's okay. But the situation alone is inadequate to it. But if you just take the situation, then to have the understanding of it, of this standard, that is inadequate. It is not enough for the understanding. That is, so to speak, the structural emotion provided by the drama. So that is the structural emotion provided by the drama because of the structure. But the whole effect, the dominant tone, is due to the fact that a number of floating feelings having an affinity to this emotion by no means superficially evident, having combined with it to give us a new art of emotion, a new art emotion. So he's saying that whatever the structure of the dramatic structure, the structure has been used by the author, but we get, the dominant tone is due to the fact that a number of floating feelings. That means when you read the beauty, about the beauty and the ugliness, we actually have a kind of affinity to to this emotion, by no means superficially evident, having combined it with it to give us a new art emotion. So we can see the combination of the emotions, and also we can see the combination of feelings with different kinds of analogy actually he has used here. It is not his personal emotions, the emotions provoked by particular events in his life, that the poet is in any way remarkable or interesting. Now here he is saying that the poet himself, he depersonalized his feelings. That means his mind here actually worked as a receptacle. It worked just as a receptacle. That means it received something, but he didn't involve himself personally in this writing. That means he had made it something which is objective. It is not something which is personal. So that's why he's saying it is not in his personal emotions, the emotions provoked by particular events in his life, that the poet is in any way remarkable or interesting. His particular emotions may be simple or crude or flat. So he's saying that his emotions, his personal emotions, which is very part of it, may be simple, crude, or flat. The emotion in his poetry will be a very complex thing, but not with the complexity of emotions of people who have very complex or unusual emotions in life. So one error, in fact, of the eccentricity in poetry is to seek for new human emotions to express, and in this search for novelty, in the wrong place, it discovers the perverse. Now he's saying that if you try to find out the new emotion, so that will be an error. because there is nothing new. Now he's saying that one error, in fact, of eccentricity in poetry is to seek for new human emotions to express. So if you try to express new human emotions, he's saying that that will be a kind of eccentricity in the poetry, and he's considering as a fault. And in this search for novelty, in the wrong place, it discovers the perverse. Perverse means the wrong thing, something which is not good. So if you try to find try to look for the novelty, that means something which is new, the new emotions, in the wrong place, so it discovers the perverse. So that is the wrong place. And if you try to find out something new, so he's saying that that will not be the okay. It's not a good thing. That is perverse. The business of the poet is not to find the new emotions. Just mark this sentence. The business of the poet is not to find new emotions. So a poet will not find the new emotions, but what will you do? But to use the ordinary ones and in working them up into poetry to express feelings which are not in actual emotions at all. So he's saying that a poet, he will look for the emotion, but he will not look for the new emotion, but to use the ordinary ones. He will use the ordinary emotions, as we have, all of us, we have emotions. So he will take those ordinary emotions, those ordinary ones, and in working them up into poetry, and he will use them in the poetry to express feelings. So he'll use emotions to express feelings which are not in actual emotions at all. And those emotions are not actual emotions. So he had worked on those emotions and he made them something new, but those emotions already existed. He didn't create anything new, but he presented that emotion in a new way using his feelings. So that is the combination of emotions and feelings. We call it unification of emotions and feelings, and thus that is the poetic sensibility, that we say. And emotions which he has never experienced will serve his turn as well as those familiar to him. So consequently, we must believe that emotion recollected in tranquility is an inexact formula, for it is neither emotion nor recollection, nor without distortion of meaning tranquility. It is a concentration and a new thing resulting from the concentration of very great number of experiences, which to the practical and active person would not seem to be to be experiences at all. Now here you can see he is a little bit, you can say, anti-romantic. I mean, he's ideal, because we know what Wordsworth say that poetry is I mean, it's a kind of emotion which is recollected in tranquility. That means when actually you have lots of emotions together, and when you have time, when you're in a tranquil mood, in a peaceful mood, then you see it, and then you started collecting all those emotion, and then you put this emotion in your poetry. So that is, I mean, into words, you put those emotions into words, and then we call it poetry. But here he's saying that consequently we must believe that emotion recollected in tranquility is an inexact formula. To him, it's not okay, for it is neither emotion nor recollection. He's saying that this is not recollection. This is not something remembering your emotion from the past, nor without distorting of meaning, or even tranquility. When you are in the tranquility, that means, for example, you had an experiences 5 days back, and then after 5 days back, you feel that you should write something about it, and you became very emotional actually when actually had that experience in the past 5 days, or maybe 1 month back. Now you have started writing something about that experience. Now, according to Eliot, when you start writing something about, I mean, when you had in the past, I mean, that experiences, and you're in a very tranquil mood, in a very peaceful mood, and you're trying to recollect, trying to remember those emotions, and when you write, he says that you are going to distort those emotions, because those emotions are not as it is when actually you felt it for the first time. So since you were not writing at that time when you felt it, now you are writing after some time. So possibly you are going to distort that emotion. So that's actually, he's saying that that is an inexact formula. He doesn't believe in it. Do you follow me what I'm saying? Do you get me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So the romantic definition, I mean, you can say the definition of poetry given by uh, Wordsworth, that is emotion recollected in tranquility. He doesn't believe in it. He says that it's an inexact formula. We cannot have poetry in that way, because if you do that, when actually you are in a very peaceful mood and you are trying to write about your past emotion, so in that way, actually, you are going to distort the emotion. So that's why he's saying that inexact formula. So it is a concentration and a new thing resulting from the concentration. So because you are concentrating of a very great number of experiences, which to the practical and active person would not seem to be experiences at all. It is a concentration which doesn't happen consciously or of deliberation. So it says that when you are trying to concentrate in that way, that is in tranquility, and you're trying to recollect all those emotions, in that sense, he's saying that actually this you're not doing it that much consciously. You're just imagining some of this stuff from there. You're using your imagination and you're distorting the emotion. These experiences are not recollected, and they finally unite in an atmosphere which is tranquil. Only in that it is a passive attending upon the event. So he's saying that it is not active. Actively, you're not doing it. I mean, your emotion is not. You're not using it in your poetry. That is very passive, because you are doing it in a tranquil mood, in a peaceful mood, and after a long time from the time actually when actually you have experienced that particular emotion. So there is a great deal in the writing of poetry which must be conscious and deliberate. So he's saying that poetry actually is a kind of conscious thing. It is something which is deliberate. Deliberate means you do it willingly. It's not like that. I mean, you're sitting idle and you're using your imagination and you're doing something. For him, it's a kind of laborious work, and it's which is very conscious. Very consciously you are writing, and very deliberately you are doing that. It's not like the romantic poet, the way actually they're writing, just using their imagination. It's not like that. In fact, the bad poet is usually unconscious where he ought to be conscious, and conscious where he ought to be unconscious. So what is the definition of a bad poet? According to T.S. Eliot, he's saying that the bad poet is usually unconscious where he ought to be conscious. The bad poet is who, I mean, when actually he needs to be conscious, at that time he's unconscious. He doesn't do it very deliberately, very consciously. And he is conscious when actually he shouldn't be conscious in that way. So when he needs to be conscious, he is unconscious, and when he is unconscious, actually at that time he needs to be conscious. So just the opposite actually he is doing all the time. So you see that if you really want to be a good poet, all the time you need to be very much conscious and deliberate to write. So it's a very kind of scientific work. You can say for him, I mean, writing poetry is a kind of science. It's not like just like the romantic poet. You're using your imagination in your idle time when you're sitting idle and you're thinking about 4 or 5 years back what happened, and from a distant past, from your memory, you are collecting some incidents or events, and then you started writing. It's not like that. So you have to be very much careful, very much conscious when you write a poem. So now he says that both Eros tends to make him personal, because if you try to be unconscious when you needs to be conscious, and when you needs to be unconscious, if you're very much conscious at that time, so you make the poem very personal. So there actually you cannot be impersonal. You cannot depersonalize yourself when actually you try those things. So poetry is not a turning loose of emotion, but an escape from emotion. So this is the perfect definition actually he tried to give about poetry. So try to remember this. This is the definition given by T.S. Eliot. So he's saying that poetry is not a turning loose of emotion, but an escape from emotion. It is not the expression of personality, but an escape from personality. But of course, not only those who have personality and emotions, who have personality and emotions know what it means to want to escape from these things. Now, just these two lines, remember. So what his definition of poetry, already we have come to know the definition of bad poet. Or if you know who is a bad poet, then certainly you know who is a good poet. So you can also find the definition of a good poet from there. And now at the end of this second part, we have come to know the definition of poetry. So again, I'm saying it. Poetry is not a turning loose of emotion, but an escape from emotion. So, according to him, unlike the romantic poets, uh, he's saying that it's not a turning loose of emotion, turning loose of emotion. That means you're not using your emotion very loosely, and you're not keeping your emotion, preserving your emotion into your poems, but an escape from emotion. So you have to leave your emotion, and then you have to be very much objective, and then you start writing your poem. So, but there must not be your emotion there. Otherwise, it will not be impersonal, and it is not the expression of personality. So that is not about your personality, but it's an escape from your personality. So that is his idea of depersonalization, to make it objective. Okay, do you understand this very definition of poetry given by?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's great. Now, in the last, in this last paragraph, actually, he tried to just have the conclusion that how tradition and this theory of impersonality, or tradition, or this idea of impersonality or depersonalization, how actually these two complement each other. So when actually you have a good sense of tradition, knowledge of tradition, or you have the idea of the whole tradition of your that we call the your sense of the past. That means when you know the past, and when you can depersonalize your emotion, then actually you can have poetry. Then you can have you can consider yourself as a poet, and your work can be considered as good, uh, while actually evaluating those words. Now, I'll be reading the paragraph, last paragraph. So he's saying that this essay proposes to halt at the frontiers of metaphysics or mysticism, and confine itself to such practical conclusions as can be applied by the reasonable person interested in poetry. Now, he's saying that it is neither metaphysics, or it's neither mysticism, or confine itself to practical conclusions as can be applied by the reasonable person interested in poetry. So he's saying that this essay actually, this will give you a kind of idea about poetry, and also an idea about poets himself. So, and if you're a reasonable person, and if you're really interested in poetry, then you will understand it. You can use this idea of poetry that has been so far manifested in this essay by T.S. Eliot. Now, again, he says, to divert interest from the poet to the poetry is a laudable aim, for it would conduce to a juster estimation of actual poetry, good and bad. Now, he's saying that to divert interest from the poet to the poetry is a laudable aim. So what was his purpose? Purpose of this essay? The purpose of this essay was that to direct the poet, to direct a reader, or to direct a critic, or even a writer, not to the poet himself, but to the poetry. So here, the text is important. You remember that at the very outset of the previous discussion, I tried to explain some of the terms, and one of the terms was autotelic text. Autotelic text, if you can remember that, the text which is self-evident, the text is self-sufficient. You don't need to understand the biography of the poet. You don't need to know the history or context, whatever it is. You just need to have the text. You just take the text and try to consider the quality of the text. So he's saying that the poet, so we shouldn't go for the poet, but we should go for the poetry. Only poetry is our concern, not the poet, not the author, not his autobiographical elements. We don't need to consider those while evaluating a piece of work, artwork, or poetry. For it would be conducive to a juster estimation of actual poetry, good and bad. So he's saying that if you can divert your interest from the poet to the poetry, then you will be able to estimate the actual work or actual poetry, and you can say that whether it is good or whether it is bad. So there are many people who appreciate the expression of sincere emotion in verse, and there is a smaller number of people who can appreciate technical excellence. Now he's saying that most of the people, they will go for the sincere emotion in the verse. They will go for the emotion, actually how this the poetry, actually it has evoked emotion into the mind of the reader. But he's saying that very few people can appreciate the technical excellence. So he's giving importance on the technicality of the poetry, not the emotional aspects of the poetry. Because when you, according to him, these emotional aspects, it's a kind of fallacy. Because when you go for the emotional fallacy, this kind of fallacy, that is, it can be affective fallacy or the intentional fallacy. Intentional fallacy is that what the actually the writer actually he wanted to say. That means the autobiographical element or writer's intention, that we call intentional fallacy. So he says that when you concentrate on the intentional fallacy, then you will lose the your capacity to judge the work from the technical perspective. So you will not be able to judge the work. Then you become very emotional, and then you fail as a critic to judge the work. So he is saying that very small number of people actually they have the capacity to judge this technical excellence of a work. Now again he says that, but very few know when there is an expression of significant emotion which has its life in the poem and not in the history of the poem. So he's saying that it's not of the history of the poem. We don't need to know the history of the poem. The emotion which has its life in the poem. The emotion is there by itself. It's not the emotion of the poet. It's the emotion in the work. So emotion of the poet or his history or history of the poet is not important at all. So the emotion of art is impersonal. This is the line, try to remember, that the emotion of art is impersonal. That means the emotion that we'll find in the piece of work, that is impersonal. That is not the emotion of the writer. That is not the emotion of the reader. It is something that is evoked by the work itself. It is not evoked by the autobiographical element of the poet. And the poet cannot reach this impersonality without surrendering himself wholly to the work to be done. And this impersonality, how can you gain this objectivity? How can you achieve this impersonality or objectivity? When you surrender yourself as a writer. That means you will not infuse into that work your emotion, and you will not make it personal. You will make it impersonal. You will make it for everybody's work, not your personal work. And he is not likely to know what is to be done unless he lives in what is not merely the present, but the present moment of the past, unless he is conscious, not of what is dead, but of what is already living. So here you see, here actually you can see the reciprocity, or you can see the reciprocal understanding between the tradition and the past, the past we should say, and the present. So from this very last line, you can understand that how this present time, that means my contemporaneity, the understanding of the present time, and also the understanding of my tradition as a writer, that how actually it can complement each other, and thus actually can make it a good piece of work. So that is overall, you can say, the understanding of the tradition and the individual talent. So we have seen that how tradition actually tried to define the tradition, and also he talked about what is tradition, and he also talked about the importance of the tradition, the different elements of the tradition, and then later on he tried to explain the idea of the impersonality or the depersonalization, and also its function, its definition, how it works, and also actually how a poet actually he can use this idea of impersonalities in his writing, and also how as a critic, as a reader, we can use it also. So, and in the last segment, he tried to conclude by mentioning that how this tradition and this idea of impersonality, they can complement each other to create a great piece of work. So now that's all from me. I would like to open the floor for your question and comments. So still, if you have any confusion or any comment, you can leave it here now. And if you have any question, I would love to answer them.
No, sir, I don't have any question.
Okay, anyone else?
It's clearly understood.
So anything else from, I can see lots of people in here, like Dipti, Jina, Jinu, anyone? Are you with me? Masum? Masum, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
So Masum, did you understand? So for what I've discussed, I mean, at least could you get some idea from it?
স্যার অল্প অল্প করে পাইছি স্যার
Okay. Now, Masum, what you have to do, you have to read the text, okay? If you read the text, I believe
sir.
that it will help you to understand it, because so far you have got the very basics, that what is it about, the tradition and the individual talent, actually, what he wanted to say. So you see, he has made poetry, it's a kind of science, and how actually he has emphasized on the technicality of the poetry, and also how actually he's talking against the autobiographical elements that should be there. So what do you think, Masum, or anybody else? Is it really possible to be that kind of impersonal actually while writing something? Is it possible?
No, sir, I don't think so.
Same here, actually. You know, I also write something occasionally. I'm not that kind of writer, but when actually I try to write poetry, I find it very impossible to keep my personal impression, personal experiences aloof from my piece of work. Because since I'm a person, and while actually I'm writing, it is literally impossible. You can say that, at least for me, impossible to put my emotion aside and just to write, because for me it is not a complete science. It's not like chemistry. It's not like physics. Poetry,
Yes,
it
sir.
has its own emotion. It has its
Own
own
emotion.
life. It has its life. So it's a living thing. If it is a living thing, then how could you say that the emotion should not be there? The writer's emotion should not be there. My autobiographical element, actually, how can I ignore them? It's not possible. But tradition, it's a good thing, that we must know the tradition. That part I agree with. That we should have a good knowledge of our past, because if we can't understand the presence of the past in our life, then we'll find that we are not guided by the right thing, because in the past we have lots of writers that we can depend on. We can take them at the yardstick to judge or to evaluate our writings. So in that sense, I think that we can take help from the past writings or from the tradition. That is okay. But the theory of impersonality, sometimes actually I find it's literally it's impossible, at least for me, to implement it actually while I'm writing something. You have one of your classmates who is a poet. What's her name?
স্যার সুমা
Shuma, can you hear me? I think she's with us. I saw her name. Shuma, can you hear me? Umme Aima Shuma, can you hear me? I would love to hear from her. She's composing or she's writing, so she could have given us some idea about it. So anyone else, do you like to add anything else, or any comments? So is that clear?
Yes, sir, it's clear.
All right then. So if you don't have any question and anything to comment on, then in that case, I'd like to call it a day. So that's all for
Sir,
today's.
can we give our own ideas about this thing, or we have to write accordingly to the text?
You can quote some of the things from the text so that we can relate to that what you're talking about when actually you want to have your own opinion. And of course, I will appreciate your own opinion, because we must not go by all these things as he said, as he prescribed in the text. Because some of the things, while actually I was reading, I myself actually I felt that I cannot agree with all these points. Even while actually you are listening to all these things, I also believe that he didn't agree with all these things as T.S. Eliot said in his text, right? So certainly I will
Yes, sir.
appreciate your own opinions regarding this matter. For example,
Thank you, sir.
his definition of poetry, and also actually what he meant by who is a good poet or who is a bad poet, and also his theory of impersonality. Definitely we can have a debate on it. So definitely you can have your own opinion, and I will appreciate it. Obviously. Okay.
Okay, sir.
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay, sir.
Thanks for your patience, and hope to meet you in another
Thank you,
lecture
sir.
in future, inshallah. And until then,
Thank you, sir.
stay safe. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Most welcome.